The October wind swept through the narrow streets of Brooklyn with a biting chill that promised winter wasn't far behind. Orange and brown leaves tumbled along the sidewalks, gathering in corners and doorways, while the late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the brownstone buildings that lined the neighborhood. The air carried the scent of roasted coffee from the corner cafe and the distant aroma of Italian cooking from the family-owned restaurants that had stood on these blocks for generations. Emma Carter pulled her worn wool coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down Atlantic Avenue, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. At 28 years old, she had the kind of face that people trusted instinctively, warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and an openness in her expression that made strangers feel comfortable sharing their stories. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her comfortable sneakers made soft sounds against the pavement as she walked. She was running late, which wasn't like her. Emma prided herself on punctuality, especially when it came to her job at Sal's Diner, the neighborhood institution where she'd worked for the past 3 years. The diner wasn't glamorous. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape in places, and the coffee was stronger than it was good, but it was honest work. And Sal was a fair boss who didn't ask questions about why a woman with a college degree was slinging hash browns and refilling coffee cups. The truth was simple, even if it was painful. Life hadn't gone according to plan. Emma had studied literature at a state university, dreaming of becoming a teacher, but her mother's illness had derailed everything. The medical bills had piled up faster than Emma could count, and by the time her mother passed away 2 years ago, Emma had been left with nothing but debt, and the kind of exhaustion that settled deep in your bones. So she waitressed. She smiled at regulars, memorized orders, and saved every dollar she could in a coffee can hidden in her tiny studio apartment. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was hers, and she'd learned to find dignity in the small kindnesses she could offer. An extra piece of pie for the lonely widower who came in every Tuesday, a listening ear for the single mother juggling 3 jobs. As Emma turned the corner onto the block where Sal's Diner stood, its familiar neon sign flickering in the growing dusk, she immediately sensed something was wrong. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk about 50 feet from the diner's entrance, and she could hear raised voices cutting through the ambient noise of traffic and conversation. Her steps slowed as she approached, her heart beginning to beat faster. Through the gaps in the crowd, she caught glimpses of movement, a tight circle of teenage boys, their postures aggressive, their laughter harsh and mocking. "What's going on?" Emma asked a middle-aged woman who stood at the edge of the gathering, her grocery bags clutched to her chest. The woman shook her head, her expression troubled. "Some punks bothering a kid. Been going on for a few minutes now. Someone should do something," but she trailed off, and Emma understood the unspoken end to that sentence. In this neighborhood, people had learned to keep their heads down. Getting involved in other people's business could lead to complications nobody wanted. Emma pushed through the small crowd, her pulse pounding in her ears. As she broke through to the inner circle, the full scene revealed itself, and her stomach clenched with anger and concern. A small boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, stood pressed against the brick wall of a closed shop, his eyes wide with fear. He was dressed unusually well for this neighborhood, a crisp white button-down shirt, dark dress pants, and polished leather shoes that probably cost more than Emma made in a week. His dark hair was neatly combed, and even in his terror, there was something refined about him, something that spoke of a different world than these Brooklyn streets. Surrounding him were 4 teenage boys, probably 16 or 17, wearing the typical uniform of wannabe tough guys, oversized hoodies, sagging jeans, and the kind of swagger that came from too much time on street corners and not enough adult supervision. They weren't touching the boy, but they didn't need to. Their presence alone was threatening enough. "Look at the little prince," one of them jeered, a tall kid with acne scars and a cruel smile. "Bet those shoes cost more than my mom's rent, huh? Maybe we should take 'em," another suggested, stepping closer. "See if they fit." The boy, Marco, though Emma didn't know his name yet, pressed himself harder against the wall, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. Emma could see he was trying desperately not to cry, fighting to maintain some shred of dignity, even as fear overwhelmed him. "Where's your daddy, rich boy?" the first teenager taunted. "He send you out here all alone? That's pretty stupid, don't you think?" Something in Emma snapped. Maybe it was the memory of her own childhood, when she'd been the scholarship kid at a school full of wealthy children who'd made sure she knew she didn't belong. Maybe it was simply that she'd seen enough cruelty in her life and refused to stand by while more unfolded in front of her. Or maybe it was just that she'd been having a terrible day, and these punks had picked the wrong moment to act like predators. Whatever the reason, Emma didn't stop to think. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the scene with surprising authority. That's enough. The teenagers turned to look at her, surprise flickering across their faces. Emma was aware that she didn't look particularly intimidating. Average height, slender build, dressed in jeans and a coat that had seen better days. But she'd learned long ago that confidence could be more powerful than physical presence. And right now, she channeled every ounce of determination she possessed into her stance and her gaze. "Walk away," she said firmly, meeting each boy's eyes in turn. Now, the tall one, clearly the ringleader, recovered from his surprise and smirked. "Oh yeah? And who's gonna make us? You?" "No," Emma said calmly, pulling her phone from her pocket and holding it up. "The police are going to make you. I've already taken photos of all your faces, and if you don't leave immediately, I'm calling 911. I'm sure they'd be very interested in 4 minors harassing a child on a public street." It was a bluff. She hadn't taken any photos, but her tone was so confident, so matter-of-fact, that doubt flickered in their eyes. "And in case you're thinking of trying something," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, "there are about 15 witnesses here, plus security cameras on that building, and that one." She gestured to the surrounding businesses, not entirely sure if the cameras actually worked, but betting the teenagers wouldn't know either. The boys exchanged glances, their bravado beginning to crack. The reality of actual consequences seemed to be sinking in. Street harassment was one thing, but getting caught on camera, getting police involved, that was different. "This ain't over," the ringleader muttered, but he was already backing away, his friends following suit. "Yeah, it is," Emma said quietly. "Because if I see any of you bothering this child or any child again, those photos go straight to the police and your parents. And trust me, I'll make sure it happens." The teenagers slouched away, throwing angry looks over their shoulders but not daring to do more. The small crowd that had gathered began to disperse as well. The drama over, people returning to their own concerns with the practiced indifference of city dwellers who'd learned not to get too involved. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and turned her attention to the boy still pressed against the wall. His dark eyes were enormous in his pale face, and now that the immediate threat was gone, she could see him trembling. "Hey," she said softly, crouching down so she was at his eye level. "It's okay now. They're gone. Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head mutely, but Emma could see the way he was trying to hold himself together, the desperate fight against tears that was making his whole body shake. "I'm Emma," she said gently. "What's your name?" "Marco," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's a good name," Emma said with a warm smile. "Italian?" He nodded, and Emma noticed his accent when he spoke again. Just a hint of something that suggested English wasn't his first language, or at least not the only language spoken in his home. My mother was from Italy." "Was?" Emma picked up on the past tense immediately, and her heart ached at the flash of pain that crossed the child's face. "She died," Marco said simply, and then he did start to cry, as if the fear and the memory and the kindness of this stranger had all combined to break down the walls he'd been building. Without thinking, Emma opened her arms, and Marco stepped into them, burying his face against her shoulder. She held him gently, one hand rubbing his back in soothing circles, murmuring the kind of comforting nonsense that didn't need to make sense to be effective. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured. "You're safe now. It's okay to be scared. You're very brave." They stayed like that for a long moment, the city moving around them, cars passing, people walking by, the everyday symphony of urban life continuing indifferently. When Marco finally pulled back, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand, Emma could see he was embarrassed by his tears. "There's nothing wrong with crying," she told him firmly. "Those boys were scary, and you handled it really well. A lot of kids would have panicked, but you stayed calm and waited for help. That takes courage." "My father says I shouldn't cry," Marco said quietly, and there was something in his tone, a mixture of love and fear, that made Emma's instincts prickle with concern. "Well, everyone has different ideas about that," Emma said diplomatically, though privately she thought any father who told his son not to cry was missing something important. "But right now, let's worry about getting you somewhere safe. Do you live nearby? Can you call your father?" Marco's expression shifted, something complicated passing through his eyes. Worry, perhaps, or calculation beyond his years. "I can call Antonio," he said. "He'll come get me." "Okay," Emma said, though she was puzzled. Why not call his father directly? Do you have a phone? Marco pulled a sleek smartphone from his pocket. Of course he had one, Emma thought, probably worth more than her entire month's rent, and touched the screen with fingers that were still trembling slightly. Come on, Emma said, standing and offering him her hand. Let's get you inside the diner where it's warm. You can call from there, and I'll get you something to eat while you wait. Hot chocolate? For the first time, a small smile flickered across Marco's face. Yes, please. Sal's diner was exactly what it appeared to be from the outside. A classic New York establishment that had been serving the neighborhood since 1967, according to the faded sign above the door. The interior was a time capsule of red vinyl booths, a long counter with rotating stools, and walls covered in old photographs of the neighborhood, local sports teams, and customers who'd become friends over decades of morning coffee and late-night pie. The bell above the door chimed as Emma led Marco inside, and the familiar warmth and smell of coffee and frying onions enveloped them. It was the quiet part of the afternoon, the lunch rush long over, and the dinner crowd not yet arrived. Only a few booths were occupied. Old Mr. Peterson with his newspaper, 2 construction workers splitting a slice of apple pie, and Linda the nurse grabbing a coffee before her night shift. Emma! Sal's voice boomed from behind the counter. He was a big man in his 60s with a full head of silver hair and the kind of presence that had kept order in his diner for nearly 50 years. You're late. I was starting to think. He stopped when he saw Marco, his expression shifting to concern. What happened, kid, okay? Long story, Emma said, guiding Marco to a corner booth, the kind with high sides that offered privacy. I'll tell you in a minute. Can you get me a hot chocolate and maybe some of those cookies Maria made this morning? Sal nodded, already moving, and Emma could feel his eyes on her back as she slid into the booth across from Marco. She waited while the boy made his call, speaking in rapid Italian to whoever was on the other end. Emma didn't speak the language, but she could hear the relief in the adult male voice that responded, and what sounded like instructions. When Marco ended the call, he looked up at Emma with those solemn dark eyes. Antonio is coming. He'll be here soon. Good, Emma said. Who's Antonio? Your uncle? No, Marco said, and that complicated expression crossed his face again. He works for my father. Before Emma could ask what that meant, Sal appeared with a steaming mug of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and a plate of Maria's homemade chocolate chip cookies. He set them down in front of Marco with a gentle smile that transformed his usually gruff face. There you go, kid, he said. You eat up, get some warmth in you. Thank you, sir, Marco said politely, and Emma noticed the formal way he spoke, the careful manners that had been drilled into him. Sal caught Emma's eye and jerked his head toward the counter. She nodded and slid out of the booth, leaving Marco with his treats. What happened? Sal asked in a low voice once they were out of earshot. Emma explained quickly. The teenagers, the harassment, her intervention. As she spoke, Sal's expression grew darker. Those punks, he muttered. I know their type. Probably from the Garcia crew, thinking they run these streets. He paused, studying Marco through narrowed eyes. That kid, though, he's not from around here. Look at those clothes, that watch on his wrist, that's serious money, Em. I know, Emma said. He's waiting for someone named Antonio to pick him up. Said he works for his father. Sal's expression shifted, something like wariness entering his eyes. Emma, I need to tell you something. This neighborhood, it's got layers. Not everything is what it seems. Some families here, they're connected. You understand what I'm saying? Emma frowned. Connected how? But before Sal could answer, the bell above the door chimed again, and 2 men walked in who made everyone in the diner look up and take notice. They were both tall and broad-shouldered, wearing expensive dark suits that fit too well to be off the rack. One was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a scar along his jawline that spoke of a violent past. The other was younger, mid-30s, with sharp features and eyes that scanned the room with the practiced awareness of someone trained to assess threats. The diner, already quiet, went completely silent. The older man's gaze found Marco immediately, and his expression softened in a way that transformed his hard face. Marco, he said, his accent thick with Italian roots. Are you all right? Yes, Antonio, Marco said, sliding out of the booth. This lady helped me. Emma. Both men turned their attention to Emma, and she felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical thing. Antonio, the older one, approached her, and Emma had to force herself not to step back. There was something about these men, something that set off every warning bell in her brain. Miss Emma, Antonio said. And despite his intimidating presence, his voice was respectful, almost gentle. "Thank you for protecting the boy. His father will want to thank you personally." "That's not necessary," Emma said quickly. "I just did what anyone should have done." "Not anyone did," the younger man said, his voice cool and assessing. "You did. That makes you different." Something in his tone made Emma's skin prickle. This wasn't just gratitude. There was a weight to his words, an implication she couldn't quite grasp. "Marco," Antonio said, holding out his hand. "Time to go home. Your father is worried." Marco took Antonio's hand but looked back at Emma with an expression that made her heart ache, a mixture of gratitude and loneliness that no child should have to carry. "Thank you, Miss Emma. You were really brave." "You were brave too," Emma told him with a warm smile. "Take care of yourself, okay?" As the two men led Marco toward the door, Antonio paused and turned back to Emma. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the counter in front of her. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly. "Anything at all, you call that number." Before Emma could respond, they were gone, Marco safely flanked by his guardians as they walked toward a sleek black SUV parked at the curb. Emma watched through the window as they helped Marco into the vehicle, the younger man scanning the street before climbing in himself, and Antonio giving the diner one last look before settling into the driver's seat. The SUV pulled away smoothly into traffic, and slowly, the diner returned to life, conversations resuming, forks clinking against plates. Emma picked up the business card. It was heavy stock, expensive, with embossed lettering that simply read, V. Rossi Enterprises, and a phone number. No address, no title, just a name and a way to make contact. "Emma," Sal said quietly, and when she looked at him, his expression was grave. "That boy, those men, you just got involved with the Rossi family." "Who are they?" Emma asked, though part of her already suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Sal was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "They're one of the old families, been in this neighborhood for generations. They run businesses, legitimate and otherwise. And Vincent Rossi, the boy's father, he's not someone you want attention from." "What kind of attention?" Emma asked, her mouth dry. "Any kind," Sal said. You're a good person. You did a good thing today. But in this neighborhood, sometimes being noticed by the wrong people can change your life, and not always in ways you want." Emma looked down at the card in her hand, then out the window at the street where Marco had disappeared. She thought about the boy's solemn eyes, his careful manners, the way he'd cried when he mentioned his mother. She thought about the fear in his face when those teenagers had cornered him, and the relief when someone had simply chosen to help. "I couldn't just walk by," she said quietly. "I know," Sal said, and there was understanding in his voice, but also worry. "That's what scares me." Emma slipped the card into her pocket, where it seemed to burn against her hip like a brand. She had no way of knowing it then, but that simple rectangle of expensive paper was the first thread in a web that would entangle her life completely. Sometimes, a single act of kindness could change everything, and sometimes, the people we save end up saving us in return, even if the rescue comes with complications we never imagined. The evening shift passed in a blur. Emma went through the motions automatically, taking orders, delivering food, refilling coffee cups. But her mind kept wandering back to Marco's frightened face, to Antonio's weighted words, to that mysterious business card that seemed to pulse in her pocket like a living thing. As she walked home later that night, the October wind had grown colder, cutting through her coat and making her shiver. The streets were quieter now, most people tucked safely in their homes. Emma found herself looking over her shoulder more than usual, though she couldn't have said what she was watching for. In her small studio apartment, she finally pulled out the card and studied it under the harsh fluorescent light of her kitchen. V. Rossi Enterprises. Such simple words to carry such weight. She should throw it away, Emma told herself. Forget the whole thing. She'd helped a child, and that was the end of it. But as she stared at the card, she kept seeing Marco's face, kept hearing the loneliness in his voice when he'd mentioned his mother. Something told her this wasn't the end at all. It was only the beginning. The business card sat on Emma's nightstand for 3 days, catching the morning light that filtered through her apartment's single window. She'd pick it up occasionally, turning it over in her hands as if the expensive cardstock might reveal secrets its simple printing concealed. V. Rossi Enterprises. 10 digits, and a weight of implication that kept her awake at night. Emma told herself she was being dramatic. She'd helped a child, nothing more, nothing less. The grateful father had sent his people to retrieve his son safely. End of story. Except it didn't feel like the end. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and dark, unable to see the bottom. The autumn had deepened in those 3 days. November was approaching, and with it came the kind of cold that settled into your bones and made you dream of summer. The trees along Brooklyn's streets had shed most of their leaves now, leaving skeletal branches that clawed at the gray sky. Emma wrapped her scarf tighter as she walked to work on Thursday morning, her breath misting in the air. Sal's diner was already humming with the breakfast crowd when she arrived. Construction workers fueling up before their shifts, office workers grabbing coffee to go, and the regulars who treated the place like a second home. The familiar chaos was comforting, a return to normalcy after the strangeness of Monday evening. "Morning, Em," called out Maria, the cook, from her station at the grill. She was a round, cheerful woman in her 50s who'd worked at the diner almost as long as Sal had owned it. "You got Section 3 today. Tommy called in sick again." Emma nodded, tying on her apron and grabbing her order pad. Section 3 included the corner booth where she'd sat with Marco. She tried not to look at it as she started her rounds, but her eyes kept drifting back to that spot. "You okay, honey?" asked Dorothy, one of the other waitresses, as they crossed paths near the coffee station. Dorothy was in her 60s, a grandmother who'd been waitressing since the disco era and had seen everything there was to see. "You've been distracted all week." "I'm fine," Emma said automatically, then paused. Dorothy had worked in this neighborhood for decades. If anyone might know about the Rossi family, it would be her. "Dorothy, can I ask you something?" The older woman's eyes sharpened with interest. "Of course, sweetie, what's on your mind?" Emma glanced around to make sure no one was within earshot, then lowered her voice. "Have you ever heard of V. Rossi Enterprises?" Dorothy's entire demeanor changed. Her expression went carefully neutral, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter, more cautious. "Where did you hear that name?" I helped a kid earlier this week. His last name was Rossi. His father's people came to pick him up and they gave me a business card." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, and Emma could see her weighing how much to say. Finally, she sighed and gestured toward the back hallway, away from customers. "Break room. Now." Emma's stomach tightened with apprehension as she followed Dorothy to the small, cramped room where the staff took their breaks. Dorothy closed the door and turned to face her, her expression serious. "Emma, listen to me carefully. The Rossi family has been in this neighborhood for over 50 years. They own restaurants, import businesses, construction companies, all legitimate on paper. But everyone knows there's more to it than that." "What kind of more?" Emma asked, though she was starting to understand. "The kind that people don't talk about openly," Dorothy said. "The kind where you keep your head down and don't ask questions. Vincent Rossi runs the family business now. He's respected and feared. People pay him for protection. Businesses that need permits suddenly get them approved. Problems disappear." Emma's mouth felt dry. "Are you saying he's—" "I'm not saying anything specific," Dorothy interrupted firmly, "because I'm smart enough to know that some things are better left unsaid. What I will say is this: the Rossi family takes care of their own, and they remember favors. If you helped Vincent's son, he'll consider that a debt, and men like Vincent Rossi always pay their debts." "The card?" Emma murmured, pulling it from her pocket. "Antonio, the man who picked up Marco. He said if I ever needed anything." Dorothy took the card, studied it, and handed it back with a shake of her head. "That's not just a business card, honey. That's access. Most people in this neighborhood would do just about anything to have that kind of connection. But it's also dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because once you're in their orbit, it's hard to get out," Dorothy said gently. "Look, I'm not saying Vincent Rossi is a bad man. I've heard he's fair, actually. Generous to people who treat him with respect, but his world isn't like ours. There are rules, hierarchies, expectations, and there are people who would hurt you just to get at him." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November cold outside. "I just helped a kid who was being bullied. That's all." "I know, sweetie. But sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." Dorothy squeezed her shoulder. "My advice? Keep that card somewhere safe. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to. And if anyone associated with the Rossi family approaches you again, be polite, be respectful, but keep your distance. Don't get pulled into that world." Emma nodded slowly, slipping the card back into her pocket. But even as she agreed, she couldn't stop thinking about Marco's frightened face, the loneliness in his voice when he'd mentioned his dead mother. Something about that child had touched her heart in a way she couldn't easily dismiss. The rest of the day passed in a blur of orders and coffee refills. But Emma couldn't shake Dorothy's warnings from her mind. During her break, she found herself doing something she probably shouldn't have, searching for information about Vincent Rossi on her phone. There wasn't much, a few mentions in local business articles about his restaurants and import company. A photograph from a charity gala 5 years ago showing a tall, dark-haired man in an expensive tuxedo, his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. Marco's mother, Emma guessed. The article mentioned a significant donation to a children's hospital. Nothing obviously criminal, but nothing that contradicted Dorothy's implications either. Emma was so absorbed in her search that she didn't notice Sal approaching until he spoke. "You're asking about the Rossis." Emma jumped, nearly dropping her phone. It's okay," Sal said, settling into the chair across from her. His expression was weary. "I figured you would. You're curious and you're worried about that kid. I get it." "Dorothy said they're connected," Emma said carefully. Sal nodded slowly. "The Rossi family is what we call old school. They've been in this neighborhood since Vincent's grandfather came over from Sicily in the 50s. Started with a small restaurant, then another, then other businesses, and yes, there have always been rumors about how they really make their money, how they maintain their influence. But Vincent Rossi, from what I've seen, isn't like the stereotype you see in movies. He doesn't go around threatening people or causing chaos. He's quiet, calculating, keeps to himself mostly, runs his businesses, takes care of his people. The neighborhood knows not to cross him, but he's never been anything but courteous to me in the times we've intersected." "You've met him?" Emma asked, surprised. "Twice. Once when he came in here about 10 years ago with his wife. Beautiful woman, very elegant. They were charming, tipped well, treated the staff with respect. The second time was at her funeral 2 years ago. Half the neighborhood was there. I paid my respects, and he thanked me for coming. Seemed genuinely devastated." Emma thought about Marco's sadness when he'd mentioned his mother. "What happened to her?" "Illness," Sal said quietly. "Some kind of cancer. Moved fast. By all accounts, Vincent did everything. Flew in specialists from Europe, tried every treatment. Nothing worked. They say he was never the same after she died, more withdrawn, protective of the boy." "Marco," Emma murmured. "Yeah. From what I hear, the kid's had a rough time. Lost his mother, and his father's world isn't exactly stable or safe. Vincent keeps him pretty isolated, probably trying to protect him, but kids need more than protection. They need connection, normalcy." Sal paused, studying Emma's face. "That's probably why those thugs saw an opportunity. Rich kid, alone on the street looking like easy prey." Emma's hands clenched into fists at the memory. "They were terrorizing him, and you stopped it. Which brings us back to where we started. You're on Vincent Rossi's radar now. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Emma could answer, the bell at the front counter rang, signaling a customer needed attention. Sal stood up, patting her shoulder. "Just be careful, Em. Good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes, especially when powerful people are involved." Emma returned to her shift, but her mind was spinning. She kept replaying Marco's face, Antonio's words, Dorothy's warnings, and Sal's measured assessment. What did she want? To forget the whole thing? To check on Marco, make sure he was okay? To understand this world she'd stumbled into? The answer came sooner than she expected. It was Saturday evening when everything changed. Emma had just finished her shift and was walking home through the darkening streets, her tips for the day tucked safely in her purse. Not much, but enough to keep her afloat another week. The temperature had dropped significantly, and she could see her breath in the glow of the streetlights. She was 2 blocks from her apartment when she noticed the black SUV. It was parked at the curb, engine running, exhaust creating small clouds in the cold air. The same SUV that had picked up Marco 4 days ago, or at least it looked identical. Emma's heart began to beat faster as she approached, every warning Dorothy and Sal had given her echoing in her mind. The back door opened as she drew level with the vehicle, and Antonio stepped out. He was wearing the same expensive suit, the same assessing expression, but there was something almost apologetic in his posture. "Miss Emma," he said, his accent thick, but his English clear. "Mr. Rossi would like to speak with you." Emma stopped, her hand instinctively clutching her purse strap tighter. "Now, if you're willing. He understands this is unexpected, but he would very much appreciate a moment of your time." Antonio gestured to the open door. "Please, I promise you're perfectly safe." Every instinct screamed at Emma to refuse, to run, to not get into that vehicle. But there was something in Antonio's eyes. A sincerity maybe, or simply the certainty that refusing wasn't really an option, that made her hesitate. "Where would we be going?" she asked. "To Valentino's. It's one of Mr. Rossi's restaurants. Very public, very safe. He simply wants to thank you properly for helping his son." Emma thought about Marco's frightened face, about the business card burning a hole in her pocket, about Dorothy's warning and Sal's advice. She thought about the sensible thing to do, which was absolutely not getting into this car. And then she thought about how many times in her life she'd done the sensible thing, how it had led to a studio apartment and mounting debt and dreams that seemed increasingly impossible. Maybe it was time to take a risk, or maybe she was just exhausted from being afraid. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but I need to text my friend where I'm going and who I'm with." Antonio nodded approvingly. "Of course, that's very smart." Emma quickly sent a message to Jenny, her best friend from college. "Got picked up by V. Rossi's people, going to Valentino's restaurant on Atlantic Ave. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call the police." Jenny's response came immediately. A string of shocked emojis and, "What? Call me as soon as you can." Emma slipped her phone back into her purse and climbed into the SUV, Antonio closing the door behind her. The interior was luxurious. Leather seats, tinted windows, and the faint scent of expensive cologne. The younger man from before was in the driver's seat, his eyes meeting hers briefly in the rearview mirror before he pulled smoothly into traffic. The drive was silent except for the low murmur of a news station on the radio. Emma watched the familiar streets pass by, her heart hammering in her chest. What was she doing? This was insane. She should ask them to stop. Should get out at the next red light. Should. The SUV pulled to a stop in front of Valentino's, and Emma's spinning thoughts came to an abrupt halt. The restaurant was beautiful. Warm light spilled from its large windows onto the sidewalk and through the glass. Emma could see white tablecloths, candles, and well-dressed patrons enjoying their meals. It looked expensive, elegant, and completely unthreatening, which somehow made Emma more nervous than if it had looked like a stereotypical mafia hideout. Antonio opened her door and offered his hand to help her out. "This way, please." The restaurant's interior was even more impressive than its exterior suggested. Dark wood paneling, vintage photographs of Italy, and the rich aroma of garlic and tomato sauce created an atmosphere of old-world sophistication. A man in a suit, the maitre d' presumably, nodded deferentially to Antonio and immediately led them through the main dining room toward a door at the back. "Mr. Rossi is in his private room," the maitre d' said in accented English. "He's expecting you." The private room was smaller, more intimate. A single table set for two, candles flickering, a bottle of wine already breathing, and standing by the window, looking out at the street below, was a man who could only be Vincent Rossi. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his expensive charcoal suit perfectly. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and when he turned to look at Emma, she was struck by his eyes. They were dark, almost black, and held an intelligence and intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see straight through her practiced composure to the nervousness underneath. He was handsome in a severe way, with strong features and the kind of presence that would make people notice him in any room. But there was also something careful in the way he held himself, a control that suggested he was constantly aware of his own power and consciously moderating it. "Miss Carter," he said, and his voice was deep, cultured, with just a trace of an accent that spoke of Italian roots. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I apologize for the abruptness of the invitation." Emma found her voice, though it came out quieter than she'd intended. "Your man said you wanted to thank me for helping Marco." "Yes." Vincent moved away from the window, and Emma noticed he kept a respectful distance, as if aware that his very presence might be intimidating. "Please sit. Would you like some wine? Or perhaps coffee? Antonio can bring whatever you'd prefer." "Water is fine," Emma said, settling into one of the chairs. Her legs felt weak, and she was grateful to be sitting. Vincent nodded to Antonio, who disappeared silently. Then Vincent took the seat across from her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, Emma trying to reconcile this polished, controlled man with the dangerous reputation she'd heard about, and Vincent studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "My son told me what you did," Vincent finally said. "How you stood up to those boys. Protected him when you had no obligation to do so. He said you were very brave." "Anyone would have done the same," Emma said. "No." Vincent's voice was firm. "Most people would have walked past. I've seen it happen before. People see a well-dressed child in a difficult neighborhood and assume he can handle himself, or they don't want to get involved. You didn't hesitate. Why? Emma thought about how to answer. I couldn't just walk by. He was scared, and they were being cruel. It was wrong. Simple as that? Vincent asked, and there was something in his tone. Not skepticism, but genuine curiosity. Simple as that? Emma confirmed. Antonio returned with a glass of water for Emma and a small espresso cup for Vincent, then retreated to a corner of the room, present but unobtrusive. Emma sipped her water, grateful for something to do with her hands. Marco doesn't make friends easily, Vincent said after a moment. Since his mother died, he's withdrawn. He doesn't trust people, doesn't open up, but he talked about you for an hour after Antonio brought him home, about how kind you were, how you made him feel safe. Emma felt her heart soften. He's a good kid, polite, brave even when he was scared. You've raised him well. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. I try, but my world isn't easy for a child. I do my best to keep him away from certain aspects of my business, but he's not stupid. He knows his life is different from other children's. Different how? Emma asked, then immediately regretted the question. This wasn't her business. She was here for a thank you and then she should leave. But Vincent didn't seem offended by the question. If anything, he seemed to appreciate her directness. I run several businesses, Miss Carter. Some are completely legitimate. Restaurants like this one, an import company, construction. Others are more complicated. I provide services that people need but can't always obtain through official channels. I solve problems. I maintain order in this neighborhood in ways the police sometimes can't or won't. It was the most honest non-confession Emma had ever heard. He wasn't admitting to anything illegal, but he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't either. And Marco? She asked quietly. Marco is innocent of all of it, Vincent said firmly. I've worked very hard to keep him separate from that side of things. He goes to a private school, has tutors, activities, but he's also isolated because of my need to protect him. His mother understood how to balance that. She gave him normalcy, warmth. Since she died, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. I'm not as good at it. Emma saw it then, beneath the controlled exterior, the expensive suit, the aura of power, a father struggling with grief and uncertainty. It made him human in a way she hadn't expected. Mr. Rossi, she began. Vincent, please. Vincent, she said, the name feeling strange on her tongue. I'm glad I could help Marco. He seems like a wonderful boy, but I'm not sure why I'm here. You didn't need to thank me in person. Vincent set down his espresso cup and leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes intent on her face. You're right. I didn't need to. But I wanted to meet the woman who showed my son kindness with no expectation of reward, and I wanted to ask you something. Emma's stomach tightened. Ask me what? Marco needs positive influences in his life, people who can show him there's more to the world than what he sees at home. Would you be willing to spend time with him occasionally? Nothing formal, perhaps lunch once a week, or a visit to a museum. I would compensate you for your time, of course. Emma stared at him, stunned. Of all the things she'd imagined this meeting might be about, this wasn't even on the list. You want me to, what, be his friend? In a sense, he responds to you in a way he doesn't with most people. And I believe, that you could help him in ways I can't. Vincent's expression was earnest now, the careful control slipping just enough to show genuine emotion. I'm asking you to help my son, Miss Carter. Not for my sake, but for his. Emma thought about Marco's sad eyes, his careful politeness, the loneliness that had radiated from him even in the diner's warmth. She thought about Dorothy's warnings, about the dangers of getting involved with this family. She thought about the sensible thing to do. I don't want money, she heard herself say. Vincent blinked, clearly surprised. I would insist. No, Emma said firmly. If I do this, and I'm not saying I will yet, it won't be for payment. It will be because Marco deserves to have people in his life who care about him for who he is, not because of who his father is or what he might offer them. For a long moment, Vincent simply looked at her, and Emma couldn't read his expression. Then, slowly, something that might have been a smile touched the corners of his mouth. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Carter. Probably both, Emma admitted. Can I think about it? Of course. Take all the time you need. Vincent pulled out a card, similar to the one Antonio had given her but with a different number. This is my personal line. Call when you've decided, or if you need anything at all. Emma took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact was electric, startling, and she pulled back quickly. "Antonio will drive you home," Vincent said, standing. "Thank you for coming tonight, Miss Carter. I know it took courage." As Emma followed Antonio back through the restaurant and into the waiting SUV, her mind was reeling. She should say no. She knew she should say no. Getting involved with Vincent Rossi and his world was asking for trouble. But as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, all she could think about was Marco's voice saying, "My mother was from Italy," with such sadness, and Vincent's eyes showing that rare glimpse of vulnerability when he'd talked about struggling to be enough for his son. Sometimes the dangerous choice was the right one. Sometimes courage meant stepping forward even when every instinct screamed to run away. Emma touched the business card in her pocket and wondered what she was going to do. The SUV pulled up in front of her building, and Antonio opened her door with the same courtesy he'd shown all evening. "Miss Emma," he said as she stepped out, "thank you for considering Mr. Rossi's request. Marco would benefit greatly from your friendship." "You care about him," Emma observed. "Marco, I mean." Antonio's stern expression softened just slightly. "He's a good boy. He deserves better than the hand he's been dealt. We all do what we can to help. But there are some things he needs that we can't provide. Things his mother used to give him." "What kind of things?" "Lightness," Antonio said simply. "Joy. A sense that the world isn't just serious and dangerous. You gave him that, even in a few minutes at the diner. Imagine what you could do with more time." With that, he climbed back into the SUV, and Emma watched it disappear into the Brooklyn night. In her apartment, Emma sat on her bed and stared at the two business cards now lying side by side, V. Rossi Enterprises, and a direct line to Vincent Rossi himself. She picked up her phone and saw 17 missed calls from Jenny, along with a stream of increasingly frantic texts. Emma smiled and called her back. "Oh my God, Emma!" Jenny's voice exploded through the speaker. "Are you okay? What happened? Did they—" "I'm fine," Emma assured her. "Actually, I'm more than fine. I just had the strangest, most surreal evening of my life." She told Jenny everything. The SUV, the restaurant, Vincent's request. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Jenny finally said, "This is insane. You know that, right?" "I know. This man is dangerous. His world is dangerous." "I know that too. So you're going to say no, right? Tell him thank you, but you can't get involved?" Emma looked at the business cards again, at Vincent's private number written in elegant script. She thought about Marco's lonely eyes and Vincent's carefully controlled pain. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I really don't know." But even as she said it, Emma realized that wasn't quite true. Deep down, in a place she was afraid to examine too closely, she already knew what her answer would be. Sometimes you met someone and knew, instantly and irrevocably, that they would change your life. Emma had felt it when Marco's frightened eyes had met hers on that sidewalk, and she'd felt it again tonight, when Vincent Rossi had looked at her with that mixture of hope and vulnerability that no amount of power or control could completely hide. She was going to say yes. God help her, but she was going to say yes. Emma waited 2 days before calling the number on Vincent Rossi's card. She'd spent those 48 hours alternating between certainty and doubt, picking up her phone and setting it down again, rehearsing what she'd say and then forgetting every word the moment she imagined his voice on the other end. It was Tuesday afternoon, her day off from the diner, when she finally gathered her courage. The November sky outside her apartment window was the color of steel wool, threatening rain but not quite delivering. She sat on her bed, the card clutched in one hand and her phone in the other, and pressed the numbers before she could talk herself out of it again. He answered on the second ring. Vincent Rossi. His voice was deeper than she remembered, more intimate somehow without the formal setting of the restaurant between them. Emma's throat went dry. "Mr. Rossi, this is Emma Carter. We met on Saturday." "I know who you are, Miss Carter." There was something warm in his tone now, almost pleased. "I'm glad you called. Have you made a decision?" Emma took a breath. "I'd like to meet with Marco, if the offer still stands." "It does." She could hear the smile in his voice. "When would be convenient for you?" They arranged to meet that Saturday at a park in Prospect Heights. Neutral territory, public, safe. Vincent suggested bringing Antonio along initially, so Marco would feel comfortable, but Emma would have the freedom to leave whenever she wished. It was considerate, she thought, careful, the kind of planning someone did when they understood how strange and potentially frightening this situation might be. When Saturday arrived, Emma found herself standing at the entrance to the park 15 minutes early, her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets against the November chill. The park was beautiful despite the season, bare trees creating intricate patterns against the pale sky, children playing on the playground equipment, couples walking dogs along the winding paths. Normal, safe, ordinary. The black SUV arrived exactly on time. Marco emerged first, bundled in a navy peacoat and striped scarf, his dark eyes scanning the park until they found Emma. The smile that broke across his face was so genuine, so full of uncomplicated joy, that Emma felt her remaining doubts dissolve. "Miss Emma!" He ran toward her, and she crouched down to meet him at eye level. "Hey Marco, it's good to see you again. Father said you wanted to spend time with me," Marco said, his formality giving way to childlike excitement. "Is that true? You really want to?" "I really do," Emma confirmed, and she meant it. There was something about this boy that called to her, maybe because she recognized the loneliness in him, having lived with her own version of it for so long. Vincent approached more slowly, Antonio a respectful distance behind, in casual clothes, dark jeans, a wool coat, no tie. Vincent somehow looked even more imposing than he had in his suit. Or maybe Emma was just more aware of him now, of the way he moved with controlled grace, of how his presence seemed to shift the air around him. "Miss Carter," he said with a slight nod. "Thank you for coming." "Emma, please," she said. "Miss Carter makes me feel like a schoolteacher." Emma then. The way he said her name, with that slight emphasis on the first syllable, made something flutter in her chest. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Antonio will be nearby if you need anything. I have some business to attend to, but I'll return in 2 hours if that's acceptable." Emma nodded, surprised by how much autonomy he was giving her. She'd half expected him to hover, to monitor their interaction. Instead, he crouched down to Marco's level, much as Emma had done. "You be good for Miss Emma, understand? Listen to what she says." "I will, Father." Marco's tone was solemn, dutiful. Vincent's hand rested briefly on his son's shoulder, a gesture of affection that seemed to cost him something to make in public. And then he was walking back to the SUV, Antonio following. Emma watched them drive away, then turned her attention to the boy beside her. "So," she said brightly, "what would you like to do? Playground? Walk? There's a duck pond over there." Marco's eyes lit up. "The ducks. Can we feed them? I brought bread." He pulled a plastic bag from his coat pocket, clearly prepared. They spent the next hour at the pond, tearing bread into small pieces and tossing it to the enthusiastic ducks and geese that gathered. Marco's reserve melted away gradually, replaced by the natural enthusiasm of a child allowed to simply be a child. He told Emma about his school, a private academy in Manhattan, and his tutors, his love of reading and mathematics, his confusion about why the other children at school didn't seem to like him. "They say my father is a criminal," Marco said quietly, watching a particularly aggressive goose chase away smaller ducks. "They say their parents told them to stay away from me." Emma's heart ached. "What do you think about that?" Marco was quiet for a long moment. "I think my father does things I don't understand, but he's good to me. He loved my mother very much. He makes sure I have everything I need." He looked up at Emma with those two old eyes. "Does that make him bad?" "I think," Emma said carefully, "that people are complicated. Nobody is all good or all bad. Your father loves you, that's obvious. And the way people earn their living doesn't define who they are as human beings." "Do you think he's bad?" Marco asked directly. Emma considered the question. "I think he's trying to do his best in a difficult situation, and I think you're very lucky to have a father who cares so much about you." Marco seemed satisfied with this answer. They moved to the playground, where Emma pushed him on the swings and watched him navigate the climbing equipment with the careful precision he seemed to apply to everything. Other children played around them, and Emma noticed how Marco watched them with a mixture of longing and uncertainty, wanting to join but unsure how to bridge the gap. "Do you want to play with them?" Emma asked gently. Marco shook his head. "They won't want me to. You don't know that. Want me to help?" Before Marco could answer, a ball rolled toward them. A soccer ball kicked astray by a group of boys about Marco's age. Marco picked it up instinctively, and one of the boys jogged over. "Thanks, hey, you want to play?" Emma saw the war on Marco's face, desire versus fear of rejection. She gave him an encouraging smile, and that seemed to tip the balance. "Okay," Marco said quietly. Emma watched him join the game, his movements initially stiff and awkward but gradually loosening as the other boys accepted him without question. Children, she thought, were often better at acceptance than adults. They didn't care about backgrounds or reputations, just whether you could kick a ball and follow the rules. He doesn't do that often. Emma started at the voice behind her. Vincent had returned early, standing a few feet away with his hands in his coat pockets, watching his son play with an expression of such naked longing that Emma had to look away from the intimacy of it. Do what? She asked. Play with other children. Trust them enough to try. Vincent moved to stand beside her, both of them watching Marco laugh as he scored a goal, his teammates cheering. He's different with you, more open. He just needs opportunities, Emma said, and permission to be a regular kid. Permission I don't know how to give, Vincent admitted. My world doesn't allow for regular. Every choice I make has consequences, and Marco lives with those consequences whether I want him to or not. There was such pain in his voice that Emma found herself responding without thinking. He told me the kids at school avoid him, because of rumors about you. Vincent's jaw tightened. I know. I've considered moving him to a different school, somewhere farther away where my reputation hasn't reached. But that feels like running, and I've never been good at that. Maybe it's not running, Emma suggested. Maybe it's just giving him a fresh start. Perhaps. Vincent was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at her directly. Thank you for this, for being here, for being patient with him. I know my request was unusual. He's a good kid, Emma said simply. Easy to be patient with. You're seeing him at his best. He has his mother's kindness, but also my intensity, my difficulty with emotional expression. He has nightmares, moments of anger he doesn't know how to process. That's called being 8 years old and dealing with grief, Emma said gently. It's normal. Nothing about our life is normal. No, Emma agreed. But maybe that's what I can offer. A few hours a week of normal. Vincent looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his dark eyes. Why are you doing this? Really? Emma thought about how to answer. Because I know what it's like to be lonely, to feel like you don't quite fit anywhere. And because, she hesitated, then continued. Because when I was growing up, there was a teacher who saw me, really saw me. Not just the scholarship kid or the girl with the sick mother. She made time for me, encouraged me, believed in me. She changed my life. Maybe I can do that for Marco. You already have, Vincent said quietly. The game broke up and Marco came running over, his cheeks flushed with exercise and joy. Did you see? I scored a goal. I saw, Emma said, matching his enthusiasm. You were amazing. Can we come back next week? Marco asked, looking between Emma and his father. Please? If Miss Emma is willing, Vincent said. Emma, she corrected automatically. And yes, I'd like that. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Every Saturday, Emma met Marco at various locations around Brooklyn. Parks, museums, the library, a little cafe that served the best hot chocolate Marco had ever tasted. Vincent was usually present for drop-offs and pickups, their conversations gradually extending beyond logistics into something more personal. Emma learned that Vincent was an early riser who preferred espresso to American coffee, that he spoke fluent Italian and passable French, that he'd wanted to be an architect before his father's death had forced him to take over the family business at 25. She learned that he read voraciously, history, philosophy, classical literature, and that he'd met Marco's mother at an art gallery in Milan. She was studying the Caravaggio, Vincent told her one Saturday as they watched Marco feed the ducks, a ritual the boy insisted on every week. I made some comment about the use of light, trying to impress her. She looked at me and said, "You know nothing about art, but your eyes suggest you want to learn." I was smitten immediately. Love at first sight? Emma asked, smiling. Love at first demolition of my ego, Vincent corrected with rare humor. She was right, of course. I knew nothing about art, but I learned. She taught me to see beauty in things I'd overlooked my entire life. She sounds wonderful. She was. Vincent's expression grew distant. She saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Even in me. There's good in you, Emma said quietly. Vincent looked at her surprised. You don't really know me, Emma. Not what I do, what I'm capable of. I know you love your son. I know you're trying to do right by him despite impossible circumstances. I know you read philosophy and appreciate art and treat people with respect even when you don't have to. Emma held his gaze. That tells me plenty. Something shifted between them in that moment. An acknowledgement of connection, of possibility. Vincent looked away first, but not before Emma saw the conflict in his eyes. The weather grew colder as November deepened. Emma found herself thinking about Vincent at odd moments, during her shifts at the diner, while walking home at night, in the quiet hours before sleep. She told herself it was just curiosity, just the natural fascination of glimpsing a world so different from her own. But she knew she was lying to herself. It was during their 4th Saturday together, as a light snow began to fall, the first of the season, that things changed. They'd taken Marco to the Brooklyn Museum, where he'd been entranced by the Egyptian artifacts. Afterward, Vincent suggested coffee at a nearby cafe while Marco dozed in the warm SUV, exhausted from the excitement. The cafe was small and cozy, the windows already fogging from the warmth inside. Emma wrapped her hands around her mug of cocoa while Vincent drank his inevitable espresso, and for a moment, they simply sat in comfortable silence. "My people have been asking questions about you," Vincent said finally. Emma's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "Background, history. They want to make sure you're not a threat, that you're who you claim to be." He held up a hand before she could respond. "I told them to stop. Whatever I need to know about you, I'd rather learn directly." "There's not much to learn," Emma said. "I'm pretty boring. Grew up in New Jersey, went to state college, took care of my mom when she got sick. Ended up here working at a diner and trying to figure out what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" Vincent asked, and the question felt weighted somehow, important beyond its simple words. Emma thought about it. "I used to think I wanted to teach, make a difference in kids' lives the way my teacher made a difference in mine. But that requires money I don't have, time I can't afford. So now, I don't know. I just want to feel like my life matters, like I'm doing something meaningful." "You are," Vincent said. To Marco, to me. The way he said it, the intensity in his eyes when he looked at her, made Emma's breath catch. "Vincent, I know this is complicated," he said quickly. "I know my world is dangerous and you should probably run as far from me as possible. But I can't stop thinking about you, Emma. The way you stood up to those thugs without hesitation. The way you treat my son like he matters. The way you look at me like I'm a person instead of a reputation." Emma's heart was hammering. "This is a terrible idea. The worst," Vincent agreed. "You're a criminal. I'm a waitress. We have nothing in common. Nothing except Marco. And this." He reached across the table and his hand covered hers. The contact was electric, sending heat racing up her arm. "Tell me you don't feel it." Emma couldn't. Because she did feel it. The pull, the connection, the dangerous attraction that had been building every Saturday. Every conversation. Every exchanged glance. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. "I'm asking if you'd consider having dinner with me. Just us. No Marco, no Antonio. Just two people who enjoy each other's company." "That's not what this is," Emma said, but she didn't pull her hand away. "You know it's more than that." "Yes," Vincent admitted. "It is. Which is why I'll understand if you say no. Why I'll respect it if you decide this is too much, too risky. But I had to ask, Emma, because life is short and uncertain, and I learned when I lost Isabella that you can't always wait for the perfect moment." Emma looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb traced gentle circles on her skin. She thought about Dorothy's warnings, about the danger of getting involved with this man and his world. She thought about the sensible thing to do. Then she thought about Marco's laughter, about Vincent's rare smiles, about the way she felt more alive in their presence than she had in years. "Okay," she said. "Dinner? One dinner." The smile that transformed Vincent's face was worth every risk she was taking. They set the date for the following Friday. Vincent sent a car, not the SUV, but a sleek sedan with a professional driver who treated Emma with careful courtesy. She'd agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple black dress she'd bought years ago for a cousin's wedding and never had occasion to wear since. The restaurant was in Manhattan, small and exclusive, the kind of place where reservations were impossible to get unless you knew someone. Vincent was already there when she arrived, standing as she approached the table, his eyes reflecting appreciation in a way that made her blush. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Emma replied, and he laughed. A real laugh, unguarded and genuine. They talked for hours, about books and movies, about growing up in different worlds, about dreams deferred and roads not taken. Vincent was surprisingly easy to talk to once his careful control relaxed, intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught Emma off guard. "I should tell you," Vincent said over dessert, "that this is the first time I've done this since Isabella died. The first time I've wanted to." "I'm honored," Emma said, "and terrified." "Good. That makes two of us." When the car dropped Emma back at her apartment, Vincent walked her to the door despite the late hour and the cold. They stood in the dim hallway, close enough that Emma could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Thank you for tonight," Vincent said quietly, "for taking a chance on me. Thank you for asking," Emma replied. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably. Vincent's hand cupped her face gently, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Emma didn't want to pull away. She wanted this. The warmth, the connection, the spark of something that felt like hope. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss tender and careful, as if he was afraid she might break. Emma felt something in her chest crack open, something that had been locked tight for too long. When they separated, both breathing a little harder, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "This is the dangerous part," he murmured. "I know," Emma whispered back. But as she watched him walk away, watched the car disappear into the Brooklyn night, Emma realized she was already too far gone to turn back. Whatever was coming, danger, complications, heartbreak, she was committed now. Sometimes love arrived quietly in small moments, and sometimes it arrived like a storm, inevitable and transforming. Emma was beginning to understand she was standing in the path of the latter. She was walking into Sal's diner on Monday morning when she saw it, a plain white envelope tucked under the door handle, her name written across it in block letters. No stamp, no return address, hand-delivered. Emma's stomach tightened with instinctive unease. She looked around the empty early morning street, seeing nothing unusual, then opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The message inside was brief. "Stay away from the Rossi family, or you'll regret it." Emma stared at the words, her heart hammering. This wasn't a joke, this was a threat. Someone was watching her. Someone knew about her connection to Vincent and Marco, and someone wanted her gone. Emma's hands were still shaking when she called Vincent. She'd locked herself in the diner's storage room, the threatening note clutched in her fingers, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. "Emma? What's wrong?" Just hearing his voice steadied her slightly. Someone left me a note, a threat. They told me to stay away from you and Marco." The silence on the other end was absolute, and somehow more frightening than any response could have been. When Vincent spoke again, his voice had changed, gone cold and hard in a way that reminded Emma exactly who she was dealing with. "Where are you?" "The diner, I just found it." "Stay there. Lock the doors. I'm sending Antonio now and I'm 10 minutes behind him." The line went dead. Emma emerged from the storage room to find Sal already flipping the sign to "closed," his expression grim. He'd seen the note. She'd been too shaken to hide it. This is what I was afraid of," he said quietly. "You've gotten caught in something bigger than you realized." "I know," Emma whispered. "I know, but Sal, I care about them. About Marco and—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the depth of her feelings for Vincent. "And you're in danger because of it," Sal finished gently. "That's the price of getting close to that world." Antonio arrived within minutes, his usual composed expression tight with concern. He swept the diner with his eyes, checking windows and sight lines, before approaching Emma. "Miss Emma, are you hurt? Did anyone approach you directly?" "No, just the note. I found it when I arrived this morning." "May I see it?" Emma handed over the envelope. Antonio studied it carefully, his jaw clenching. "This is from the Castellano organization. I recognize the style. They've done this before, trying to intimidate people connected to Mr. Rossi." "The Castellanos?" Emma's voice came out smaller than she intended. "A rival family. They've been trying to expand into territory Mr. Rossi controls. You've become visible to them. You've been seen with Marco, with Vincent. They're trying to create pressure to find weaknesses." Antonio's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Miss Emma. This is not something you should have been exposed to." The door opened, and Vincent entered like a storm, controlled but barely, his dark eyes scanning Emma from head to toe, checking for injury. When he seemed satisfied she was physically unharmed, some of the tension left his shoulders. "Sal, thank you for keeping her safe. Would you give us a moment?" Sal nodded and retreated to the kitchen, leaving Emma alone with Vincent and Antonio. Vincent took the note from Antonio, read it once, and his expression went absolutely still, the kind of still that came before an explosion. "This ends now," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Antonio, increase security on all our locations, and send word to Castellano that if he comes near Emma again, there will be consequences." "Vincent," Emma said, her voice stronger now that the initial shock had passed. What does this mean? Am I in real danger? He looked at her, and the conflict in his eyes broke her heart. The Castellanos are trying to send a message. They want to show they can reach people close to me. But they won't actually hurt you. That would cross a line that would start a war nobody wants. He paused. However, intimidation can escalate. Broken windows, following you, making your life difficult. They want you scared enough to leave on your own. And if I don't, then I increase your protection to the point where you won't be able to live normally. Bodyguards, constant surveillance, restrictions on where you can go and when. Vincent's voice was heavy with regret. Emma, I never wanted this for you. I knew there were risks, but I convinced myself I could keep you separate from this side of my life. You can't, though, Emma said, understanding washing over her. Can you? That's not how your world works. Everyone connected to you is a potential target. Yes, the single word carried the weight of admission, of apology. Antonio cleared his throat. I'll wait outside, give you privacy. He slipped out the front door, taking up a position where he could watch the street. Emma and Vincent stood in the empty diner, the morning light filtering through the windows, making everything feel surreal. This was the moment, Emma realized. The moment where she had to decide if what she felt, what they both felt, was worth the price it demanded. I should walk away, she said quietly. That's the smart thing to do. Go back to my normal life. Forget I ever met you. Yes, Vincent agreed, though the word seemed to cost him. You should. I won't stop you. I'll make sure the Castellanos know you're no longer connected to us, that you're off limits. You'll be safe. But I'll miss you every day for the rest of my life. Vincent's careful control cracked, showing the emotion underneath, and Marco will be devastated. You've become important to him, Emma. You've given him something I couldn't. Hope that the world can be kind. Emma felt tears burning her eyes. This isn't fair. No, Vincent said simply. It's not. Nothing about my life is fair. I was born into this world, shaped by it, and now I'm trapped by it. But you have a choice. You can walk away, and I'll make sure you're protected. That's the gift I can give you. Your freedom. Emma thought about Marco's laughter at the duck pond, about his joy when she'd helped him with his homework, about the way he'd hugged her goodbye last Saturday and whispered, I wish you could be my mom. She thought about Vincent's rare smiles, about the way he looked at her like she was precious, about the kiss that had promised something she'd never expected to find. She thought about the life she'd had before them, safe, predictable, and utterly lonely. What if I don't want that gift? She asked. Vincent's eyes widened slightly. Emma, I'm not saying I'm not scared. I am. This note terrified me. But running away from everything that scares me is how I ended up working at a diner with a degree I'm not using, and dreams I'd given up on. Emma stepped closer to him. You and Marco, you've reminded me what it feels like to matter, to be needed, to be part of something bigger than myself. You could die, Vincent said bluntly, or be hurt. I can protect you better than most, but I can't guarantee your safety. Not completely. Is that really worth it? I don't know, Emma admitted. But I know that walking away, never seeing Marco again, never exploring what this is between us, that feels like dying too, just slower. Vincent closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face with unexpected gentleness. If you stay, things will change. You'll have security with you sometimes. There will be rules about where you go, who you see. I'll need to know you're safe, and that means accepting limitations on your independence. I can accept that, within reason. And if things escalate, if the Castellanos push harder, then we deal with it together, Emma said firmly. I'm not a child, Vincent. I'm choosing this with my eyes open. Don't take that choice away from me by deciding what I can handle. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. Respect, maybe, mixed with the fear of someone who'd already lost one person he loved. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Someone told me that before, Emma said with a small smile. I told them I was probably both. Vincent kissed her then, and it was different from their first kiss. This one carried urgency, relief, and the weight of a decision that would change both their lives. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. I'll keep you safe, he promised. Whatever it takes. I know you will. But Vincent, I need you to do something else too. What? End this. Whatever conflict you have with the Castellanos, find a way to resolve it without more threats or intimidation. Show me that your world has room for solutions that don't involve fear. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. That's not how things are usually done. Then change how things are done. For Marco. For me. For yourself. Emma held his gaze. You told me your wife saw the good in you. Let me see it too. The next week was tense. Emma had security now, a quiet man named James who dressed like a regular Brooklyn resident but watched everything with trained eyes. He kept his distance, giving her space, but his presence was a constant reminder of the new reality she'd accepted. Vincent worked on resolving the Castellano situation through channels Emma didn't fully understand, meetings with intermediaries, negotiations over territory and business arrangements. She didn't ask for details, understanding that some aspects of his world would remain separate from her. What she did ask for was Marco. Their Saturday visits continued, but now they included Vincent more often. He'd join them at the park, at museums, at the little cafe with the good hot chocolate. Emma watched him learn to relax around his son, to be playful in ways that clearly didn't come naturally but that Marco treasured. Father actually smiled today, Marco told Emma one afternoon as they built a snowman in Prospect Park. Vincent standing nearby with coffee, watching them with an expression Emma was learning to read. Like, really smiled. He doesn't do that much. Maybe he's finding reasons to, Emma suggested. Marco looked at her seriously. Are you going to stay with us? It was the question Emma had been expecting, the one she'd been preparing for. I'm going to try, Marco. If your father and I can figure out how to make it work. I hope you do, Marco said quietly. I know you're not my mom, but sometimes when you're helping me with homework or pushing me on the swings, it feels like maybe families can be made, not just born into. Emma's throat tightened with emotion. I think you're right. I think families are about choosing each other, about showing up even when it's hard. Then your family, Marco said with the simple certainty of childhood, because you keep showing up. Later, after Marco had been picked up by Antonio for a tutoring session, Vincent and Emma walked through the park, her hand tucked into his arm for warmth. He asked me to stay, Emma said, to be part of your family. What did you tell him? That I'm trying, that we're trying. She looked up at Vincent. Are we? Trying? Yes. Vincent stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Emma, I've spent 2 years in a kind of fog, just existing, going through motions. You've reminded me what it feels like to actually live, to want something beyond survival and obligation. That's a lot of pressure, Emma said, trying for lightness. It's not pressure, it's gratitude. Vincent's expression was sincere. The Castellano situation is resolved, by the way. We reached an agreement. They get some concessions in areas I don't particularly care about, and in return they leave my personal life alone. It's done. Emma felt relief wash through her. Peacefully, through conversation and compromise rather than threats. You were right. There are other ways to handle conflicts. I'd forgotten that, or maybe never really learned it properly. Isabella tried to teach me, but I was too young, too stubborn. Maybe I'm finally ready to listen. Character growth at 43, Emma teased gently. Better late than never. Vincent smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. I have something to ask you. It's probably too soon, too fast, but given everything that's happened, I've learned not to wait for perfect timing. Emma's heart began to beat faster. What is it? Move in with us. Not immediately. We can take time, do this properly, but eventually, when you're ready. Marco needs stability, needs to know you're not going to disappear, and He paused, choosing words carefully. I want you in my life, Emma. Fully, not just stolen moments on Saturdays. I want to wake up with you, have breakfast together, argue about what to watch on television. I want normal, domestic, boring things I never thought I'd want again. Emma stared at him, stunned. Vincent, that's huge. I know. And I know your independence is important to you, that you have your own life, your job. I'm not asking you to give those things up. I'm asking you to expand your life to include us, to let us expand ours to include you. He squeezed her hands gently. But if it's too much too soon, I understand. Just think about it. Emma thought about her tiny studio apartment, about the diner shifts that paid just enough to survive. She thought about the dreams she'd deferred, the life she'd been living in a holding pattern, and she thought about Marco's smile, about Vincent's rare laughter, about the feeling of being part of something that mattered. I'll think about it, she promised. But Vincent? I'm already leaning toward yes. The kiss he gave her was answer enough. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in February, Emma stood in the kitchen of Vincent's brownstone in Park Slope, making pancakes while Marco sat at the counter doing homework, and Vincent read the newspaper with his inevitable espresso. It was ordinary, domestic, exactly what Vincent had promised. She'd moved in gradually. A drawer of clothes, then a closet, then finally giving up her apartment and bringing everything. The diner had been understanding when she'd reduced her hours, and she'd started taking online classes toward finishing her teaching degree. Vincent had offered to pay for everything, but Emma had insisted on covering what she could, maintaining her independence even as their lives intertwined. It wasn't always easy. There were still aspects of Vincent's business she didn't understand and didn't ask about. There were still men in suits who came to the house for meetings, still phone calls taken in private. But Vincent kept his word. That part of his life stayed separate from their home, from Marco, from Emma, and slowly, they built something new. Not a traditional family perhaps, but family nonetheless, built on choice and courage and the kind of love that grew from unlikely soil. Emma? Marco's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Can Sarah come over after school next week? She's in my class and she said she'd like to meet you. Emma felt her heart swell. Marco had friends now, real friends. The change in schools had helped, as had his growing confidence. Of course she can. We'll make cookies. Excellent. Marco returned to his homework with satisfaction. Vincent caught Emma's eye over his newspaper and smiled. The real smile, the one she'd worked hard to earn. She smiled back, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. She thought about that day last November when she'd seen a frightened boy being bullied, about the choice she'd made to intervene, how impossible it would have seemed then that this would be her life now, making breakfast in a brownstone, part of a family she'd never expected to find. Sometimes courage meant standing up to bullies, and sometimes it meant standing up to your own fears, your own doubts, and choosing love even when logic said you shouldn't. Emma had done both, and while she couldn't say the path ahead would be easy, Vincent's world still carried dangers, still demanded vigilance. She could say with certainty that it was worth it, because some families were born, and some were built, brick by brick, choice by choice, Saturday by Saturday, until one day you looked around and realized you were home. Pancakes are ready, Emma announced, setting a plate in front of Marco. These look perfect, he said, and then, almost shyly, thanks, Mom. Emma froze. Marco had never called her that before. She looked at Vincent, who'd gone very still, watching his son with careful attention. I mean, if that's okay? Marco asked uncertainly. I know you're not really my mom, but it feels like... It's more than okay, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. She moved around the counter and pulled Marco into a hug. It's perfect. Vincent stood and joined them, his arms encircling both Emma and Marco, creating a circle of warmth and belonging. And in that moment, Emma knew with absolute certainty that every risk, every fear, every difficult choice had led her exactly where she needed to be. Home wasn't a place. It was these people, this moment, this love built from courage and hope, and the simple act of choosing each other every single day, and that was worth everything.